Two guys, same program, same diet. One grows twice as fast. Here's why. Insulin-like growth factor. Now, you may be very familiar with growth hormone. IGF-1 is actually triggered by growth hormone, but it behaves a little differently. Growth hormone is just the signal. So this is released after training, sleep, low blood sugar. But IGF-1, this is your builder. This is the molecule that actually remodels the tissues. So you can think of growth hormone as the foreman, but IGF-1 more as the workers, the one who actually are building the muscle behind the scenes. And these workers are going to 10x the gains that you already have when you recognize that IGF-1 is the primary anabolic signal inside the muscle. It triggers mTOR, which is going to reduce your breakdown. It increases satellite cell activation, which means longer term growth. It supports bone density, recovery, tendon strength. Essentially, as I prefaced, better results from the same training modalities. So the logical question becomes, well, let's trigger more IGF-1, Joseph. But I would say, okay, but which IGF-1? Because you have liver IGF-1, which circulates through your blood, created when GH reaches the liver, enters the bloodstream, and overall supports the whole body in terms of more holistic growth. Or are you actually talking about muscle-produced IGF-1, aka the mechano-growth factor, made inside the muscles during heavy mechanical tension, which is a precursor to one of the systems you can use to leverage 10x more growth than testosterone? Because you can have low blood IGF-1, but high muscle IGF-1, which is the factor that actually matters for growth. And your training quality is therefore far more important than any blood markers in this regard. Now, before talking about optimization of IGF-1, my philosophy is always elimination before optimization. It's no use optimizing actions and habits that are already poisoning you. Speaking of poison, the first and most important killer with IGF-1 is going to be cortisol. Now, I'm sure this is something that you are familiar with because cortisol and IGF-1 have an inverse relationship, meaning higher cortisol equaling lower IGF-1 production and lower IGF-1 activity. Everyday stressors, some of which are very, very familiar. I just want to pick out three that I think you can eliminate altogether. Number one is stimulant overuse. Caffeine has a life of over 6 hours in the blood. So if you are having your iced Americano after 3 p.m., then it is still active in the time where you're supposed to be winding down and is going to severely impact your recovery. Overtraining, this is a really big one that is going to upset a lot of you, but your training philosophy needs to be very similar to that of Mike Menzer or maybe a Dorian Yates. Only real OGs are going to remember this particular screenshot from the very famous film Blood and Guts by Dorian Yates, where he shares his training philosophy, which is anti-junk volume, doing 25, 30, 35 sets in a training session is just absurd. What we need to remember is that junk volume, doing too many sets, creates more cortisol, which is going to make us more stressed, which is going to have a negative impact on IGF-1 production and IGF activity. What you actually want to do is shorten your workouts between 45 minutes to an hour, but bump the intensity up considerably. You're working in that kind of 85, 95% of your 1 rep max range. Really, really intense stuff. If you want a training modality to follow for pure IGF-1 optimization, Dorian Yates would be the top of the pyramid for me. And I have sentimental feelings because Dorian is British, obviously, but very easily, if you're an objective watcher of bodybuilding, you have to put Dorian in top 5. He was one of those individuals that completely changed bodybuilding forever in 1997, I believe, was probably his best year. And then one I think you can eliminate altogether is alcohol. Alcohol is poison. It has absolutely zero net positives for you. I really don't believe, I've been sober for a long while now, but I really don't believe alcohol has any net benefit to your life whatsoever. The second, and this is going to be fairly controversial because, again, I do speak extensively about fasting, but we need to be specific here and nuanced. Huge calorie deficits force your body into that survival mode, which is going to drop IGF-1 dramatically. Calorie restriction, lower IGF-1 levels. If you're starving, your body is obviously not prioritizing growth. Longer fasts and chronically under eating. So I think it's important for me to preface this that fasting is a very valuable tool if your outcomes are more kind of mental acuity and also cutting and maintaining and staying fairly lean or focused. But if you're trying to grow, as the title of this video, growth hormone, 10x your gains, it's probably not the most optimum system to follow. And I'll probably have you do away for it, especially if you're very young and you're still in your teens or early 20s. You could probably forego the fasting unless you're at a weight where you're very, very happy and you would prefer to kind of cut. The problem here is low calories, low leptin, suppressed hypothalamic GHRH, lower growth hormone, and lower IGF-1. So leptin isn't just your hunger hormone, it's that master growth regulator in this regard. The third, and one of the crucial 80 to 20 principles that we need to ingrain and punish into our psyche is poor sleep is going to murder your growth hormone and murders your IGF-1. And this is obviously downstream. The IGF-1 is downstream from the GH, as we prefaced. And those pulses, those growth hormone pulses, come mainly in deep sleep, especially in the first 90 minutes of deep sleep as well, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But if you're missing sleep, you're missing that growth signal. Low protein and amino acids, of course, directly increase, protein and amino acids directly increase IGF-1 production. Low protein means low building blocks for your IGF-1. Specifically, if we're going to be, again, very, very direct with some of the amino acids, leucine is going to be very, very important because it doesn't just stimulate mTOR in muscles, it increases IGF-1 gene transcripts in the liver. So if there is an amino acid to prioritize, leucine, found mainly in foods like eggs, activates your hepatic mTOR and turns on the IGF-1 gene. And then low micronutrients in the form of zinc, magnesium, vitamin D, creatine, eggs we've just talked about, is going to have a catastrophic effect on reducing your IGF-1 signals. Specifically something like vitamin D, which acts as a transcription factor for increased IGF-1 receptor expression. If you've got low vitamin D, essentially you've got fewer receptors, which means a weaker IGF-1 signal. It's also noteworthy to mention zinc, which is required for IGF-1 receptor folding and activation. I did want to talk about your 20% inputs for 80% outputs, which follows Pareto. The two most essential ones are fixing poor sleep and also fixing your cortisol control. Your IGF-1, that's going to constitute 80% of how effective your IGF-1 is going to be for your growth goals. Now let's talk about optimization. There's some specifics here with the slow eccentric, especially the piezo 1 effect. When you're training, you really want to be prioritizing these 3 to 4 second negatives on the compound. Why? Because slow eccentrics don't just create more muscle tension, they literally deform your muscle membrane in a way that triggers a biochemical alarm system, which is known as piezo 1. So this is a mechanosensitive ion channel which opens and calcium floods into the muscle, not in a panic way, but kind of like a signal of, hey, let's go. We've got so much tension. We need to grow. We need to evolve. We need to adapt to this particular stressor on the body. So this calcium influx amplifies IGF-1 expression locally inside the muscle and even increases the release of mechano growth factor, which is kind of IGF-1's more anabolic cousin. If you're unfamiliar with piezo 1, it's essentially a mecho sensor, basically a tiny biological pressure switch embedded in the muscle membranes. So your muscle fibers have kind of sensors or ears that kind of listen out for that tension. And when they notice that tension, calcium influx increases and, those anabolic pathways, MGF and IGF. Why this is particularly interesting is MGF only spikes when the force on the muscle is high and slow. So jumping, sprinting, heavy lifting, they don't activate this particular pathway. It needs to be slow 3 to 4 eccentrics, which is lowering the weight with control. It's not just a hypertrophy tool. It's one of the few movements that can literally change what genes your muscle chooses to prioritize in the growing process. So we need to make sure that we are being very, very clear with our signals. The second is going to be post-workout whey and also fruit with the whey. I'm going to talk about tart cherries in just a moment as an IGF-1 amplifier. But essentially, this post-workout shake, it's all to do with insulin. Insulin upregulates this hepatic IGF-1 output by increasing GH receptor sensitivity in the liver. So this means your liver is going to be way more responsive to the GH that you've already produced. If you've got a more responsive liver, more IGF-1 for the same growth hormone pulse. Insulin also represses this protein known as IGF-BP1, which is a kind of binding protein that normally locks away IGF-1. So if you've got lowering of this binding protein, then you've got more free IGF-1 circulating, meaning more impact on muscle and bone. This means your post-workout shake isn't just helping muscle glycogen, it's pharmacokinetically shifting your hormone signaling window. Now, the fruit that I would have you leverage would probably be either cherries or blueberries, because of the pigmentation. It activates the same anabolic pathway IGF-1 uses, and in doing so, it raises, of course, IGF-1 production, reduces oxidative stress that normally blocks IGF-1 signaling, and enhances insulin sensitivity. So cherries, blueberries with your whey protein shake, really, really good idea to activate those same IGF-1 pathways. Now, the most significant, of course, has to be the sleep. I told you previously that the first 90 minutes of sleep is where 70% of your daily growth hormone is released, and this is the only window where GH converts into IGF-1 at full power. During your first descent into stage N3 slow wave deep sleep, your physiology shifts, so insulin drops, cortisol collapses, sympathetic tone powers down. This combination super sensitizes growth hormone receptors in the liver. The exact same growth hormone pulse while awake has absolutely no anabolic effect, but when you're sleeping, it converts IGF-1 at the highest rate possible. So this is the real reason why deep sleep builds muscle and bone like no other time. So that first 90 minutes, you have to make sure it's uninterrupted. You have to make sure that you are optimizing to get the most deep, uninterrupted sleep as possible. Also, that binding protein that I mentioned previously, during the first 90 minutes of sleep, it drops sharply, so freeing up IGF-1 again to be able to grow muscle and bone. If you don't have deep sleep, IGF-1 basically just stays locked away and you can't signal any growth. And these signals are only translated into growth overnight. So your workout sends the stimulation, so that's the piezo 1, that's the MGF, that's mechanical tension, but the actual gene expression happens in deep sleep. First 90 minutes, your body increases the IGF-1 gene transcription, boosts MGF, which is the hyperanabolic IGF-1 splice variant, repairs microtubule deformation from eccentric loading, increases local IGF-1 receptor density, and resets mechanosensor sensitivity for the next session. Do this and you will 10x your results. No theories, facts. Speak soon.